The 1,000-acre complex is located in a corner of the Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge. It is the U.S. Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois, sometimes called the House of Pain or the End of the Line. Once it was the scene of the customary prison violence, exploding in a week of rampage in October 1983 that left 2 guards knifed to death and an inmate killed. Since that time, something approaching calm has prevailed at Marion. But are we paying too high a price for that peace? Bob Fall reports from the belly of the beast.
This is America's toughest prison, for what the U.S. Bureau of Prisons calls the worst of the worst.
Now we have all our rotten apples in one barrel.
In this barrel, most of those apples are kept in virtual solitary confinement, lockdown, in tiny 6 by 9 foot cells, 23 hours a day.
Alienate them. That's the number one goal. Alienate them. Make them feel forgotten, abandoned by the people on the streets, society, their family, their friends.
Where else in the world is there a place that people are locked up for 4 years straight, 23 hours a day?
For almost 300 men in Marion's lockdown, there is no work, no group activity, no church.
We're being treated as a kind of a hazardous waste.
It makes you angry. It makes you bitter.
Some people, they go crazy. Other people, they break them.
Marion is unique. No other prison in U.S. history has been in lockdown this long. And U.S. officials say the Get Tough policy, which began here 4 years ago, will be permanent.
We have one basic requirement. We require inmates to behave themselves for a period of time.
Prison critics say Marion is barbaric, designed not just to control inmates, but to humiliate and then break them. Marion, say the critics, turns men into animals.
I don't think there's any question that it's a form of slow torture.
Marion is a mind control prison where your human spirit is not meant to survive. Your human spirit is meant to be broken.
Prison rules, for example. Officials say if inmates conform, they can return to other prisons. But inmates swear the rules are always changing, that they don't know what they have to do to get out.
I wash the socks, I hang them on the bars. I'm told to take that off. Now, if I don't do that, that means another year in this place.
Marion cost a small fortune, almost $40,000 a year for each prisoner, roughly twice other federal prisons. Every time a man is moved here, 3 guards accompany him. To keep weapons and drugs out, inmates who come back from court appearances have body cavities examined by x-ray or by hand.
It made me feel just like a woman that got raped. That's how I felt. Because it was the same thing, I'm telling you.
Prison officials insist that Marion is essential, that it makes prisoners elsewhere toe the line so they won't get sent here.
The frustration, the rage that builds, you say then, can be a good thing?
Definitely. I mean, as long as everything is green and roses and you got your own way, why should you change? I don't see any other better way of doing it at this point in time.
But Marion's critics contend everything Marion controls now will explode later.
If you mistreat them, and you mistreat them for long periods of time, that mistreatment eventually comes back to haunt you.
You are now creating violent people, without any question about that. Marion, the Marions of the world are nothing but sitting time bombs.
And it's like you put a dog in a cage and poke it with sticks and abuse it and treat it badly for years, and then you let it out of the cage. Do you expect it to be a good pet? Tell it to go play with the children? Of course not. You can't expect that to happen with prisoners either.
The question then is whether America's safest prison is also America's most dangerous. Bob Fall, CBS News, Marion, Illinois.
We have put a real dilemma for the prison system on the American agenda tonight. The problem is this: what do you do with those prison inmates who are the worst troublemakers, the most violent, the ones who make it nearly impossible for prison authorities to go about the business of confining and rehabilitating other inmates? The federal government and 2/3 of the states have found what they believe is a solution: segregating the very meanest in special prisons with so-called super maximum security and minimal privileges. The toughest prison in the land is in Marion, Illinois, and our agenda reporter is Walter Rogers.
Marion is psychological and physical torture. Most men can't handle it.
Close 10.
They even try to escape. You know, they even try to jump the fence and get shot, kill themselves. They tired of it. They can't handle it no more.
There's no other alternative, because these are people who have a long history of either hurting people or trying to break out of prison, and they've had every reasonable opportunity to function in an open population.
For nearly 2 years, Warden John Clark, a former Roman Catholic priest, kept the lid on what critics call the most repressive prison in the country. Marion collects the most dangerous gang leaders and troublemakers from other federal and state prisons, like multiple murderer Matthew Granger.
You don't understand what I was. I mean, I was dripping blood off my lips. I just cut a man's head off. I was sick.
For the more than 300 inmates at Marion, home is a solitary 6 by 8 foot concrete cave. Accused murderer George Scalf spends 23 hours a day in his cell.
If you're going to leave me like this for the rest of my life, save the taxpayers' money and kill me.
In 1983, after a series of riots and murders, the Federal Bureau of Prisons locked down Marion inmates permanently. Now there is nearly 1 guard for every inmate. Outside recreation in this exercise cage has to be earned. Unruly inmates can be chained to their concrete slab beds for hours, even days. And there is no hesitation to overwhelm any inmate resistance with force. Critics of the system charge it is inhumane.
Marion is a monument to how much we know about the technology of control and manipulation, and how little we know about how to heal the human spirit.
With good behavior, the average inmate stays 3 years, but there is no return to society from here, only eligibility for a less restrictive prison elsewhere.
Since we've gone to this current regime, there have been no serious staff assaults, no hostage situations, no serious escape attempts.
That kind of success at a federal prison has prompted 36 states to establish their own maximum security lockdowns. But these state experiments have produced glaring failures caused by a lack of money, manpower, and oversight. An example, last May in New York's maximum security prison at Southport, inmates rioted after staff and budget cuts reduced food and medical services.
The inmates are not getting what they're supposed to be getting. They take it out on employees of the facility.
Southport guards support prisoner lockdowns, but they say without more money and staff, Southport will never be a Marion model. Months after the riot, prisoners still intimidate guards by throwing urine and feces from their cells.
It gets in your face, your eyes, your mouth.
The problem with these lockdown units is that they are in the darkest corners of state prisons, or they are the state prisons that are least open to outside inspection.
The New York State Correctional System would not allow us inside their penitentiary at Southport and told us if we tried to take any pictures, even from the prison parking lot, we'd be cited for trespassing. Whatever the problems, authorities will continue to warehouse the most violent and disruptive inmates. The strategy, they say, eases the financial and staffing burdens on other prison systems while neutralizing the worst of the worst.
I'm a little monster. Inside, I'm a demon. If you don't have places like this, I'll make you pay. I'll make you pay every day of my life.
Walter Rogers, ABC News, Marion, Illinois.
Ordering killings and smuggling drugs into California prisons. That's what the feds say the members of the Aryan Brotherhood are doing. They charged 16 members with running an extensive criminal enterprise today. The charges detail 5 murders and accuse an attorney of helping smuggle drugs and cell phones. 7 people outside prison were charged with assisting the white supremacist gang.
Russian novelist Dostoevsky once wrote, "The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. That judgment would be harsh for anyone setting foot in any of our nation's 123 federal prisons." A series of new reports by the Justice Department's Inspector General found unsafe conditions in chronically understaffed facilities that are falling apart and have failing security systems that allow prisoners to smuggle in cell phones, drugs, and weapons. In tonight's Prime Focus, ABC News Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas has a look at the crisis in America's crumbling federal prisons.
America's federal prisons are home to 160,000 inmates, including some of the nation's most dangerous offenders. Yet many of the facilities are literally falling apart. A new Justice Department Inspector General report saying all 123 Federal Bureau of Prison facilities require maintenance, with some in dire need of upgrades.
We're seeing crumbling prisons. We're seeing buildings that we go into that have actually holes in the ceilings in multiple places, leading to damages to kitchens, to doctors' offices, to gymnasiums, and they're not being fixed.
The Metropolitan Corrections Center, the MCC, the federal facility in Lower Manhattan that held notorious drug lord El Chapo and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, had fallen into such disrepair that the Bureau closed it, at least temporarily, in October of 2021. There is currently no reopen date for the facility. Shut down because of collapsing ceilings, crumbling concrete, completely unusable kitchens, in need of repairs totaling $230 million.
We're seeing problems in every institution. It's a global problem. The business as usual isn't working for the BOP. They have to change that, and they have to address these very serious problems.
Taft Correctional Institution in California was so unsafe, DOJ also had to shut it down. Built in 1996, problems with unstable soil causing cracks throughout the facility. The report said some gaps were so big the sun shines through. Total needed repairs cost an estimated $200 million.
We're talking about structural things. Can't this bleed over to the overall security posture of an institution if you just have things that are falling into disrepair?
What we've seen is when you don't fix your infrastructure, we don't keep your building up to speed, you create safety and security issues. We've seen inmates sleeping with pipes running over their heads that leak, that aren't getting fixed. But that's what we're seeing, and it leads to safety and security issues.
And it's not just dilapidated buildings plaguing America's prisons. A 2021 search of a federal prison in Atlanta found 134 inmate-made weapons, marijuana, methamphetamine, and enough prescription pills to almost fill 2 one-gallon bags, and 705 cell phones, some hidden in walls. This prisoner was caught using his prison cell phone for live streaming and posting on Facebook before being caught.
I'm not just talking about guns, knives. You clearly want that out of the prison. But what we're seeing is tobacco, which is often a currency in the prisons. We're seeing synthetic drugs coming in. We're seeing cell phones coming in. A cell phone in a prison is a deadly weapon.
Broken and outdated security cameras have been another huge problem. Recent inspections found 142 of 263 security cameras at that federal prison in Atlanta were inoperable or malfunctioning. MCC, where Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide, also had serious operational issues related to security camera functionality. For corrections officers, none of these findings are a surprise.
We've been complaining about our prison conditions for many, many years. And it's the conditions of confinement for the offenders, but it's also the working conditions that our employees work in.
Bureau of Prisons Director Colette Peters said the BOP will carefully evaluate and implement any necessary corrective actions to ensure that our mission of operating safe, secure, and humane facilities continues to be fulfilled. Fixing our failing federal prisons is not going to be cheap. The Bureau of Prisons estimates that it will cost upwards of $2 billion to make needed repairs and modernize aging facilities. But annual budget requests by successive administrations are usually a tenth of that, and Congress authorizes even less. Lindsay?
Comes with quite a hefty price tag to bring about change. Pierre, our thanks.
Famously been called a cleaner version of hell, and it's where Johar Tsarnaev would go if the jury decided to spare his life.
In an exclusive interview, a former warden and a former inmate tell us death is easier than life at the federal supermax. The I-Team's Warren Lemanchek traveled to Colorado for a closer look.
It is as isolated as the prisoners who call it home. The prison, called ADX Florence, is a tomb for the living.
To me, it's life after death.
Bob Hood was warden at this supermax prison. He spoke exclusively to the I-Team in detail about a prisoner's sparse existence here, 2 hours south of Denver. For Johar Tsarnaev, what's his life in ADX like?
Even if the behaviors are good, though, it's pretty much a 23-hour-a-day in the cell, 1 hour outside. And even outside, it's not a walk in the park. It's a caged environment.
Inside the supermax, Tsarnaev would join a notorious group, the Unabomber, Oklahoma City bomber Terry Nichols, and other Islamic terrorists like 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Moussaoui, Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of the 1993 World Trade Center attack, and Richard Reed. But Hood says Tsarnaev would be no match for them or the 400 other hardened criminals here. He'll always have to be in solitary.
He's young, he's probably not streetwise, and he's very susceptible to assault, I think, because the average inmate would like to hurt him. His life will always be in danger.
This is the most secretive prison in America. No one is allowed inside, and the only pictures we have are from federal lawsuits.
A prisoner lives in a cell the size of a bathroom. It has a shower, a toilet, a concrete slab covered with a thin mattress. In the rare time outside, prisoners are kept in cages. One 15-minute phone call per month and a small black and white TV may seem like luxuries. But Hood says they're also tools, so the guards have something to take away.
It is as stark can be. It was not designed with humanity in mind.
The isolation, the solitary, you know, day to day, you're trying to keep your basic humanity from slipping through your fingers.
Ray Luke Levasseur of Maine spent 5 years here after being convicted of bombing public buildings. He says the sensory deprivation can drive a man insane, and lawsuits show it has.
You just begin to degrade over time. You feel it.
And so, as Tsarnaev's lawyers fight to save his life, both the former inmate and the former warden agree he may wish they hadn't.
I think it's a false choice in the sense that I think they're both death penalties.
What is the worst possible punishment?
Their hearts will say, kill him. If they're really looking for revenge and know the system, they should be asking for life imprisonment at the supermax.
The Federal Bureau of Prisons has the final say over where Johar Tsarnaev spends his days. People who've been here say the best hope an inmate has is to be sent somewhere else. Reporting in Florence, Colorado, Lauren Lemanchek, WBZ News.
What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. Another episode, Green Lit Gang TV. Good morning. Hope you guys are doing wonderful. Man, today we're going to be covering David Michael Sahakian, or known as Big Dave. A very infamous, famous member of the Aryan Brotherhood who was appointed to the council, not the three-man commission, kind of an underling council by Barry Mills, who was arguably the most famous Aryan Brotherhood member. Some would say Thomas Silverstein. I would probably go with Barry Mills. But in this case, David Sahakian, he's a guy I've had a couple requests to do videos on. He's hard to even find pictures of. He's hard to really find personal info. So what I did was I found cases, indictments, conspiracies he was wrapped up in. The dude had power. There's another YouTube channel I would really encourage you guys to check out. I watched his video that he talked about with David Sahakian. And kind of like my video, though, yes, it talks about Sahakian, but in order to do one on him, you have to talk also about the people around him if you want to have a decent length video. And that channel is called As the Key Turns. It was done by it's done by a former USP Marion veteran correctional officer. He was there for like over 20 years, knew these people personally. So I encourage you to check that channel out, As the Key Turns. I got a lot of helpful information from his video. So David Michael Sahakian, prison number 547-44097, up for parole, according to the video I watched that was uploaded about a year ago on his channel, As the Key Turns. It says up for parole maybe like 7 years. Guy's responsible for massive drug dealing inside a federal prison, murder for hire plots, just the gamut and the things that the Aryan Brotherhood are known for. I've covered this video I've covered this topic in some of my Aryan Brotherhood videos, but it's the famous murders of the DC Blacks that was put on by Barry Mills and T.D. Bingham, the famous case of, the Invisible Ink saying war with DC Blacks. And a lot of that arose because when Barry Mills found out that a hit was placed on David Sahakian and another guy, Barry Mills said, okay, game on. And I did not know that. That was really very interesting that a hit was placed on Sahakian by members of the D.C. Blacks, who was arguably the Aryan Brotherhood's biggest rival in the history of prison gangs. And that famous attack happened at the Lewisburg Penitentiary on August 28th, 1997. That was, and a lot of you guys, I'm sure, have watched it, led by Al Benton. They murdered Frank Joyner and Abdul Salam, and they stabbed Byron Ball almost to death. Brutal. But yeah, that was initially because a hit was placed on David Sahakian. So we're going to, for those of you who don't know the history of the Aryan Brotherhood, we're going to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to read from an awesome article I found. Starts out, quote, most prisons in America had been racially segregated until the 1960s when they were desegregated, racial violence flared, and inmates formed gangs along color lines. 4 decades later, the problems have got so bad that sometimes judges will order this segregation in order to preserve security. So they were desegregated in the 60s. Now like I said, judges ordered segregation back then. Now they're segregated just by the inmates themselves to the best of their ability. The Aryan Brotherhood itself was born, quotes, in 1964 inside California's supermax San Quentin prison, originally created by Irish-descended bikers. They were vastly outnumbered by black and Mexican prisoners. Their strategy was simple. What they lacked in numbers, they would make up for in brutality. And boy, has the Aryan Brotherhood stood out in that department. Slaying members of other races, attacking prison officers, doing whatever was necessary to strike terror in the hearts of those around them. The Nietzschean maxim was that a brother's a brother till that brother dies. So the blood in, blood out oath that a lot of, not just the Aryan Brotherhood, but a lot of other prison gangs take on. To join the ranks of the Brotherhood, one would have to kill a black inmate. To get out, one would have to be murdered oneself. Blood in, blood out. As a result, the Brotherhood earned a reputation for a zero-tolerance policy on disrespect from other inmates. They fought gladiator style, which is essentially a simple but balletic street fight magnified times 10. Like everything else in prison, tenfold. A 10-second fight in prison is an eternity. And, really quick, it is, even on the street, I don't know if you've even been in street fights, but a 30-second street fight, a minute, that's a long time. Most street fights don't last that long. Most street fights, 20, 30 seconds. That's a long time to be throwing fists, kicking, Now you go into prison, right? That's why it's saying 10 seconds, because knives, whatever else is homemade, weapons they can use, 10 seconds is enough to kill somebody, more than enough time. Like everything else in prison, everything's magnified, all right? In much less time, windpipes can be severed, jugulars torn out, spinal cords pierced, and livers punctured. But the AB made a science of death. Their warrior attitudes enveloped studying anatomy, texts in prison, libraries to better understand parts of the human body that could be maimed for maximum effect. So basically, I'm going to stab you in certain areas. It's going to cause the most damage. They exercised a lot in their cells. They developed strength such that they could break handcuff restraints. Therefore, membership became selective, almost Mensa-like, based on physical strength, willingness to kill on sight, and you got to have brains. A lot of inmates, a lot of these white inmates, hate to say, I am Caucasian. You can tell the difference. Guys I've met on the street, guys I've met in, like I said, treatment facilities, jail. You can tell the difference between somebody who's a real deal and somebody who's just a junkie, loser. You can just tell who's faking it and who's not. Read stuff such as Hitler's Mein Kampf. They read Nietzsche, Tolkien, Machiavelli, Sun Tzu. You gain ranks by battles, by missions. Not all of it locked up, explained Tree 1488, an Oklahoma Aryan Brotherhood member posting on the White Power Stormfront website. Brothers glow as close as vets do when they go into battle fighting for a common cause. We are there for each other, even on the outside. I have a high ranking. It has taken me nearly 7 years of missions to earn. It's crazy. And, what made him so famous is what it talks about. It talks about the photos of the AB, right? They're huge. They're buff, huge necks, forearms, tattoos of Vikings, lightning bolts, shamrocks, claws. It's just absolutely crazy. And then it talks about, if you wear one without permission, and you get caught wearing that without permission, they might kill you, or they're going to forcibly remove it off of you. Or even if you die and they realize, hey, this guy's a faker, they're going to cut it off of you with a razor. You saw them in pictures. They got the knit caps are pulled lower over their eyes, big walrus mustache. They want to look like soldiers. They want to look like outlaws. All right. They want to, a lot of them were outlaw bikers. A lot of the nicknames, they even were cartoon-like, right? That's what it talks about. The Hulk, Bart Simpson, Blinky, Speedy, Tweak, the Baron, Lucifer, and Super Honky. Okay, I'm about 50-50 on those. I did a video, a couple of the other ones. The one that still takes the cake was Schizo. That's still to my day, still to this day, the best one. Their eyes are intense and defiant, glaring right through the camera and down the throats of anyone who looks at their picture for all time. That's true, man. I still think, and you guys leave a comment below, not just the Aryan Brotherhood, but any prison member pictures, any prison gang pictures you guys have seen. What's the one that sticks out most to in your mind? Comment below. Tell me what you think. I would love to have a conversation about it. For me, to this day, it's still the picture of Barry Mills with the dark sunglasses on. That one still gets me. And I watched a doc about him. It was Gangsters America's Most Evil doc. I don't know if you guys remember that. Came out like 12 years ago. It was on regular cable, and it talks about him being in the courtroom. And he's shackled down, handcuffed down, and just, yeah. Very, very interesting. Very, very crazy, the thought of that, and very intimidating for anybody, right? The gang really, like I said, in the 80s, especially the 90s, they really started developing a criminal network outside of just prison walls. So they weren't just about violence anymore. Now it became about money, all right? Meth trade, heroin trade, that became a huge source of it. And I will say this. In my experience in the streets, doing what my past was and all that. Not obviously, I was never in a gang. I was never a prison gang member. I've never even been to prison. But my experience dealing with gang members of all different races, a lot of them have drug problems. A lot of them are on heroin or meth or a combination of both. And that goes hand in hand with what I read about the AB members. A lot of them were on heroin. A lot of them were on meth. And it's crazy, right? And it amplifies their already willingness to commit crime, right? They killed rival gang members. They killed blacks, homosexuals, child molesters. They killed snitches. They killed people who stole their drugs or owed them a few $100s. They killed prison guards. They killed for hire and for free. They killed most of all in order to impose, and I do believe this, they killed to impose a culture of terror that their low numbers, they were going to make up for in their simple brutality. From 1975 to 1985, members committed 40 homicides in California prisons and local jails, as well as 13 murders in the community. From 1978 to 1992, AB members, suspects, and associates in the federal system were involved in 26 homicides, 3 of which involved staff victims. Now, David Sahakian was in federal prison. Really quick, the U.S. spends some $60 billion annually on its prison and jail systems. That's so much money. And some joke with cruel irony that it has been getting its money's worth. The AB's the most lethal killers, and they compare them to like a Delta Force, right? Like a Green Beret. They are the best of the best and the most skilled at killing. They're one of the big 4 prison gangs in the USA. And the big 4 prison gangs all originated in California. All right? And what's special about all of them, and particularly the Brotherhood, is that it grew from the inside out. That's what all of them did. Their ability to communicate. So many of these guys are in 23-hour massive lockdowns. And they're still able to get out whatever they need to, right? Really quick, right? Because a lot of people, and they are racist. There's definitely a level of racism to all of this. But I still put business first for the Aryan Brotherhood over their ideals of just a pure race, right? So talking about Charles Manson really quick, the infamous cult leader who was responsible for the murders of Sharon Tate and members in that house and other murders. Charles Manson basically was a cult leader, got control over a large group of people, was promising a race war to happen, and they had to commit these murders. And they basically thought that by committing these murders of these wealthy white people, that the police and the public would blame it on African Americans, and that would kick off a race war. Charles Manson was insane. And actually, now when I watch back on his videos, he's just a little guy with swastika tattooed, or not tattooed, I'm sorry, carved into his head. And I go, man, how did he get control of those people? But in 1973, a reputed killer, Charles Manson, was rejected by the Aryan Brotherhood when he asked to join. He refused to murder for the skin color alone, which is interesting because I'm like, he murdered people or had people get killed in real life to start a race war and try to blame it on the blacks. But anyway, the AB wanted Manson to kill a black because black is black. And Manson's lieutenant, who were all females, one of them, Lunette Squeaky Fromm, wrote in a letter, he will not do this, and they are against him. And he actually had some protection. Initially, he wanted the AB to protect him, right? And a lot of people want the AB to protect him because the ultimate fear for anybody going into the prison system, especially the federal prison system, is that within hours of arrival, you would be punked, which means you're going to be forced into doing sexual favors by other gangs. And if you're white, that's usually going to be a black or Hispanic gang, or it could be traded among them as chattel, quote. Not that the Aryan Brotherhood was fussy. It too traded in that sort of goods. It didn't matter whether you were gay or not. The homosexuality is looked down upon as a violation of one of the AB's sacred oath, all of which seem to end with the promise of punishable by death. But talking about the business of the racism, right? They have allies such as LIMA, or 50% white Hispanic gangs such as California's Nazi lowriders. It's a mix, as the authorities have cracked down on the Brotherhood, so it has turned to newer, younger associates and other racial gangs. So at the end of the day, it's about money, right? They're willing to mix with outside their race. So we're going to talk about some of David Sahakian's cases, one of which was an indictment for the murder of Charles Ledger. Basically, it broke down like this. Describe the process. On or about August 1995, defendant David Michael Sahakian sent a note to defendant Michael Patrick McElhaney saying that he wanted to have Aryan Brotherhood associate Charles Ledger murdered. In about August 95, defendant Michael Patrick McElhaney selected a guy by the name of Gregory Story to murder Charles Ledger. In August 95, defendant Michael Patrick McElhaney sent a note to defendant David Sahakian agreeing that yes, Charles Ledger should be murdered. And then, again in August 95, David Michael Sahakian ordered Gregory Story to murder Charles Ledger. So, McElhaney selects Gregory Story and says, hey, Sahakian, yeah, I do think we should do it. Here's who I have in mind. Sahakian then goes, I agree, and he orders Story to do it. So it gives you an idea of the power David Sahakian carried. All right? He provided Gregory Story with a knife to be used to murder Charles Ledger. On or about August 25th, 1995, Gregory Story then murders Charles Ledger by stabbing him to death. Then in 96 and 97, defendants Michael Patrick McElhaney and David Sahakian ordered a number of other inmates to testify falsely that Gregory Story killed Charles Ledger in self-defense. Needless to say, it did not work. It actually backfired. So when I watched the video on watch As the Key Turns, great YouTube channel. It says that their plan was to scare him into like, oh, you better testify that he did it in self-defense. Well, it worked opposite. They all testified that, no, man, these guys wanted him dead. So, yeah. Another case on June 9th, 2002, David Sahakian, an inmate at the United States Penitentiary of Marion, Illinois, and the reputed leader of the prison's Aryan Brotherhood gang was charged in a fourth superseding indictment with first-degree murder in violation and a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Now, he didn't actually kill this person. We'll get to this. And possession of a weapon in prison in violation of a penal code. Prior to trial, the government filed a motion to preclude Sahakian from presenting the defense of necessity at trial, which means basically he was like, oh, I had to kill this guy out of necessity, out of fear. And then we go to 2003, the district court commenced a jury trial that lasted 69 days. And after 8 days of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a consensus on the murder and conspiracy to commit murder. And like I talked about in my last video, when you throw in conspiracy, the government does this, right? It lowers their bar of provability. It's just a conspiracy, okay? Now, Sahakian had been locked up and he went back to prison and basically never got out in 92 because he was convicted of being a felon in possession of a handgun. He's sentenced to 360 months. And like I've said in videos, to give you an idea of a marker, 120 months is 10 years. All right? So do the math from there, okay? That's 30 years he got, which is crazy. He has a violent history. He's been incarcerated at the USP Marion ever since. It's a federal maximum security prison with well-known documented history of violence. 2 or more of the big gangs in the 90s when Sahakian went in there were the Aryan Brotherhoods and the DC Blacks. The Aryan Brotherhood maintained a running hit list, right, of black prisoners it encountered. It should be killed. They had a gang under them called the Dirty White Boys. That was an associated gang. Now, we're going to get to why Sahakian was indicted for the murder that he actually ended up beating in 2002. On May 18th, 1999, Terry Lamar Walker, a black inmate at USP Marion, was stabbed to death by inmate Richard McIntosh, who was armed with a shank, while another inmate, Carl Knorr, held him. Kind of reminded me of the Troy Kell murder. Troy Kell murdered Lonnie Blackman, while another inmate, I forget right off the top of my head his name, but he held him down. The entire incident was witnessed by 2 correctional officers, interviewed a number of inmates, 2 corrections officers, and then they interviewed a number of inmates about the murder that the prison did and the cops did. One of the inmates associated with both the Dirty White Boys and the Aryan Brotherhood agreed to cooperate on the condition of anonymity. Dear God. He informed the investigating officers that Sahakian was a shot caller or leader of the AB gang at the USP Marion and had ordered Walker's murder as a favor to Laeme, or the Mexican Mafia. When asked about the weapons used to carry out the murder, the informant told corrections officers that at least 6 members of the AB had shanks in their possession at one time, and they hit him in their rectal anal cavity. And basically, he told them, if you want to find these things, you're going to have to run them through an x-ray machine because of where they were hidden. After gaining this information, the prison officials proceeded to conduct a shakedown at the institution in an effort to locate additional weapons and weapon-making tools. Sahakian was one of the first to be segregated from the general population for an x-ray examination. He was escorted to the institution hospital where he agreed to comply and admitted having a shank in his possession. And that means he had a shank in his butt. That's literally what that means. Sahakian was then taken to a dry cell where after 15 minutes of self-examination, it took him 15 minutes to finally get it out because you can't just pull that out. Dear God, that is crazy to me. I've done so many of these stories, but that is still crazy to me. Comment below. I don't even care about what exactly. Just comment below, please. I want to hear your thoughts. It was wrapped in plastic to protect, obviously, himself. And inside of the plastic was a 4.5-inch piece of sharpened metal covered with a plastic tip and wrapped in toilet paper. After many months of investigation and filing of 4 superseding indictments, Sahakian was indicted by a grand jury on 1 count of first-degree murder. Jesus. That's just insane. Prior to trial, the government filed a motion in Lamine in an attempt to bar Sahakian from introducing evidence of his defense theory of necessity. I killed out of necessity. The district court granted the government's motion, finding that Sahakian had failed to demonstrate an imminent threat to his safety. And why they did that was because they said if it takes you 15 minutes to pull that out of you, then you're not in a real threat, because it said in quote, right? It said, quote, the threat to, basically it says that they weren't going to let you, basically if an inmate faced an imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death and that he had no reasonable legal alternative to avoid that threat, the imminent should be narrowly constructive more than a generalized term, and that an inmate wasn't just going to be basically, and the court said this, I'm laughing saying this, that an inmate wasn't going to get the courtesy of, hold on, let me get my weapon out really quick to remove, to get the shank out so I go ahead and fight you. It's just crazy. Yeah, it's just nuts. And mind you, there was another indictment on or about 1995. A couple inmates were indicted with David Sahakian, another gentleman by the name of Alan Hawley, who's in a lot of these things I read, and others, to possess with intent to distribute heroin. And that was another charge he picked up. So he goes to court on the gun charge, gets hit with 30 years federally, so he had a huge violent history. And then you throw in the fact that he's running drugs, doing all these things, in prison, gets wrapped up in the murder. But remember, he did beat the murder charge. Okay, he did beat the murder charge. They just weren't able to prove it. So, really quick, we're going to be talking about the race war and the hit that was placed on Sahakian. In December of 96 at Lewisburg, the DC Blacks prison gang killed a white inmate. After this murder, a message was given to Dewey Lee, a prisoner transferring from Lewisburg to Marion. And it said, to tell David Sahakian, or Michael McEnany specifically, and nobody else, that they've been having racial problems at USP Lewisburg and to get ready. Lee understood the phrase to get ready, what that means, and it means start making knives and organizing AB members. The message got delivered very beginning of 1997, and on January 2nd, 1997, about a dozen members of the DC Blacks attacked 6 white inmates at Marion. The AB members at Marion were met and decided to move on and kill whatever DC Blacks and associates we could, Michael Wagner, an AB member, said. And then he was transferred by prison officials to Marion to the supermax prison at Florence to prevent Wagner from assaulting any DC Blacks. So this gentleman, Michael Wagner, obviously says, yeah, we're going to come out, we're going to kill everybody we can after this attack. And, well, prison officials find out and they get him out of the way. Now, going to Barry Mills, all right? Several messages were delivered to Barry Mills indicating there was a war at Marion. Even though Wagner was in the hole, he was able to communicate with Mills by speaking through a system of drainage pipes that connected to the two of them. Mills responded that he would, quote, see what's going on and work this out, and told Wagner not to make any moves. Both Mills and T.D. Bingham were housed at Florence, Colorado, the ADX, and as a majority of the AB Commission could approve a war, and only the AB Commission could approve the war with DC Blacks. When Mills found out that DC Blacks had put a hit out on Dave Sahakian and Michael McEnany, then it finally was decided. He sent a message to Bingham via AB member Chris Risk telling him, quote, the Toads put a hit on David Mack. The war's on. Let Lewisburg know. End quote. Bingham received the message on August 14, 1997. It's just crazy. And then there's the final quote one with war with DC Blacks. It's crazy. To send it to Lewisburg and to move on the DC Blacks. And then finally, August 28th. And you see, right, a message on August 14th gets delivered from Mills to a guy by the name of Chris Risk. Well, it only took exactly 14 days for the attack to finally kick off, led by Al Benton. So, yeah, very interesting. David Sahakian's kind of one that gets forgotten, but I really wanted to talk about him. And I'm really interested that he beat the murder charge. A lot of times, wound its way through the courts. The guy was murdered in 99. It took until 2004 for the trial to play out. And it said that some observers said the California trial itself will likely have more impact on the Brotherhood than the verdict. During 4 months of testimony, dozens of former gang members and prison officials testified in great detail about the gang's operations, secret codes, and rules. Testimony included explanations of a complex coded alphabet, how to make invisible ink with urine, and how inmates passed along messages between cells and even different prisons. So, Sahakian, there's a couple members on trial, but the ripple effect that this stuff causes is insane. And this is why we just see the continuing problem with the justice system and crimes, and really why gangs run the prisons, because you can't stop them. You can move them around. You can move Barry Mills. You can move Sahakian all around the country, max prison to max prison to max prison. It doesn't matter. Mills and the one guy, Wagner, that got moved from prison because he said after the white guys got attacked by the DC Blacks, hey, we're going to get as many as we can. He gets moved to ADX, which is as secure as it gets, and he's still communicating with Mills. And then the messages go out to have the war in Lewisburg. So, yeah, David Sahakian, there you guys have it. Hope you enjoy it. Till next time, see ya.